What if I told you that your entire life could be explained with just one glass jar? This simple story will completely change how you see time, priorities, and purpose. Most of us spend our days rushing, juggling, trying to fit everything into a life that already feels too full. But what if the problem isn't time? It's how we choose to fill it. Today's story is about a wise professor who walked into his classroom one morning with a glass jar and gave his students a lesson they would never forget. A lesson about family, health, dreams, and joy, and how easily they can all be buried under the weight of life's sand. It was an ordinary morning in a college classroom. The students chatted softly as the professor walked in, carrying a large, empty glass jar. Without saying a word, he placed it on the desk in front of the class. He reached under the table and brought out a box filled with large, smooth rocks, each about the size of a fist. One by one, he began placing the rocks into the jar until it was full. The students watched quietly, unsure of what he was doing. When the last rock touched the rim, the professor looked up and asked, "Is this jar full?" The class nodded and said, "Yes, sir, it's full." The professor smiled slightly. He reached down again, this time pulling out a box of small pebbles. As he poured them into the jar, the pebbles rolled between the spaces of the rocks, filling the gaps easily. "Now," he asked again, "is the jar full?" This time, the students hesitated. Some said yes. Others were not so sure. The professor just smiled, because the real lesson was only beginning. Without saying a word, the professor reached beneath the table once more and brought out a small bag filled with fine sand. The students leaned forward, curious. Slowly, he poured the sand into the jar. The sand slipped easily into every tiny space between the rocks and pebbles, filling it completely. When he finished, he gently tapped the jar and asked once more, "Now is it full?" The classroom burst into laughter. "Yes," the students replied together. There couldn't possibly be any more room left. But the professor wasn't finished yet. He smiled, picked up a cup of water from his desk, and slowly poured it into the jar. The water trickled down, soaking into the sand until not a single drop could fit more. The jar was truly full now. The students laughed again, but this time, they knew there was meaning behind it. The professor looked at them, his eyes calm but sharp, and said, "This jar represents your life." The room fell silent. The students knew they were about to learn something they would remember forever. The professor pointed to the jar and said, "These big rocks represent the most important parts of your life: your family, your health, your dreams, and your purpose. Even if you lose everything else, as long as these remain, your life will still be full." He picked up a few of the smaller pebbles and continued, "The pebbles are the other things that matter: your job, your house, your studies, your achievements. They add value and structure to your life, but they are not your foundation." Then he touched the sand and said, "And this is the small stuff. The arguments, the distractions, the endless scrolling, the things that don't truly matter but take up all your space if you let them." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "If you fill your jar with sand first," he said, "there will be no room left for the rocks." The same goes for life. If you spend all your energy on the little things, you'll never have space for what truly matters. The classroom was silent. Every student understood. They had been filling their own jars with sand for far too long. The professor looked around the room and said softly, Many of you think you don't have enough time. But the truth is, you're just filling your jar in the wrong order. He held up the jar again, the light glinting off the glass. Your life will always be busy, he said. But if you make time for your family, your health, your dreams, if you place your rocks first, everything else will fit around them. He paused, then added, if you focus on the sand, the small, meaningless things, you'll wake up one day realizing your jar is full, but your heart is empty. The room stayed quiet. The students weren't just hearing a lecture. They were seeing their lives in front of them, clearly for the first time. As the professor prepared to end his lesson, one student raised his hand with a curious smile. "Sir," he asked, "what about the water? What does that represent?" The professor chuckled gently and said, "Ah, the water. That represents life's simple joys." He looked out the window and continued, "No matter how full your jar may seem, there's always room for a little water, for laughter with a friend, a quiet walk at sunset, or a cup of coffee shared with someone you love." He smiled warmly and said, "Never forget, those small, joyful moments don't take away from life's meaning. They fill the spaces that remain, making your life whole." As the class sat in silence, the professor looked at them one last time and said, "At the end of your life, it won't matter how much sand you collected. It will matter how strong your rocks were." He continued, "Your health, your family, your love, your purpose, these are your foundation. Protect them, prioritize them, because when life gets shaken, only the big rocks will remain." He set the jar gently on the desk and said, "Fill your life carefully. What you choose to put in first will shape everything that follows." And with that, he walked out of the room, leaving behind not just an empty jar, but a full lesson on how to live a meaningful life. The professor's jar is more than a classroom experiment. It's a mirror for your life. Every day, you decide what fills your jar, the big rocks that matter, or the sand that slowly steals your space. You can't control how much time you have, but you can control what you give it to. Make space for your health, your family, your dreams, and your peace of mind. Everything else, work, worries, distractions, will fit around them. Remember, the jar of life isn't about how much you can squeeze in. It's about choosing what deserves to be there. So, the next time you feel overwhelmed, remember the jar. Empty it in your mind and start filling it again, this time with what truly matters. If this story made you pause and think, give this video a like, share it with someone who needs this reminder, and subscribe for more motivational tales every week. And tell us in the comments, what are your big rocks in life? What truly matters most to you?